So great. So today, thank you, Chris, very much. This is exciting. Wow, what a great group of people. I had fun last night, met some new friends over that was fun. Anyways, so my name is Matt Slaughter. I run Earthfort, located in Corvallis, Oregon, and basically I'm a soil testing laboratory. So one of the reasons that Chris asked me to talk first is because if you want to know that you've got a living soil, there's only one way to know that for sure and how well it's working. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is things that a lot of you have already heard this story, the living soil, soil microbiology. But I like to start with big picture stuff. How many of you recognize this little earth, right? The only place that we know of that has life. So life is the key, right? It's not chemistry. It's not geology. It's life. It's biology. We're a living system. I heard a lot of talk today. I've been studying a new thing. I'm kind of a researcher as well a little bit. How many of you have heard of the idea of a constantly adaptive system? How many of you have heard that concept? That means basically that any group of individuals coming together to do something will not predict the outcome, but that they will change every time they reorganize themselves. So in other words, I'm up here speaking today. My expression is different than if I was in the audience, right? And so when we work together, and it works that way in it's an ecological process, it's a holistic perspective, right? So we want to build soils, and we want to preserve this thing, right? We want to continue. How many of us will hope that the earth continues for a little while? A few hundred more million years, billion years, whatever, you know? How many of you want people around for that, to see that, right? So we need to do some things to make sure that that happens, right? So one of the questions I ask people, you know, I'm from the Northwest. I can't leave the Northwest. Why can't I leave the Northwest? Trees, water, mountains, the ocean. Got it all. I got a desert, all within 2 hours of me, right? The whole thing. Can't leave it. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And I'm driving the video guy crazy because I'm not standing on the podium. So, you guys, how many of you have heard this before? I'll just say it again because it's fun. Who fertilizes the forest? Who rotates the crops? Who irrigates? Who tills that soil? And yet, some of the most productive systems in the world are these natural forests. You know, how many of you are interested in increasing the biomass production of your operations? All right? How many of you think that it's hard to do that? All right? Maybe it's not so hard. The forest has a process, natural systems. There is a process in place that feeds the plants. You know, a lot of you, no offense, a lot of you are growing a plant that is known by the designation of weed, which means that it likes to grow in places that other plants don't. In other words, it likes bad soil, right? So you spend a lot of time and money trying to grow plants that naturally grow wherever they want to, and pretty prolifically until we kill them all. But so this is a natural system. What happens when man gets involved in that system? So this is the scary part. This is the part where we talk about some of the problems. You know, how many of you know why the Dust Bowl happened? You remember the story behind the Dust Bowl? It was really simple. It was mechanical tractors, right? How many of you are no-till? How many of you are diehard fans of no-till? Okay, give that up because you got to till the soil sometimes. So conservation tilling is the answer. Over-tilling is the problem, not just tilling the soil. So I talk about broken dirt. So if you're on Instagram, my handle is Dirt Fixer. Yeah, yeah. Apparently Soil Whisperer was taken. So, but you know, so some of the problems, you know, when we look at the soil, you got to think about, you know, if you want it to be a living system, there are some things that you can look at and you know if your soil is working or not. Is it eroded? Is it washing away? Does it have good structure? Does air and water move through that soil, or is it soppy, gloppy mess? Or is it so sandy that as soon as you put water in it, it's gone, right? Those are things that are indications of bad soil. Now, you guys, you don't have that problem, and I realize that, you know, for the most part, I am, as they say, preaching to the choir. So, but I also get to talk to farmers. How many of you are not cannabis growers? You don't be bashful. Thank you for coming. so, okay, wonderful, wonderful. How many of you grow things besides cannabis? Okay, see, now you're all farmers to some degree and not just cannabis growers, which is great. So some of the things, you know, just quickly, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Over-tillage, chemicals, harvesting. Every time you drive on a field, it causes damage to the soil. So if we start paying attention and taking care of these things, when we do things that are damaging, we can then also implement things to fix it. So here's the scariest picture in the world. So how many of you seen this picture before? Okay, this is 20 years old. I don't have a new one. This is from 1997. This part of the world, recognize this little section here, Midwest United States? One of the fastest degrading areas in the world is the United States. Our ability to produce food is pretty limited because of soil degradation. And that's the inability of arable soil to support crops, right? That's kind of the bottom line definition. China is obvious, India, Africa, those are obvious places. But the U.S., you know, and since the Dust Bowl, the USDA has been trying to push healthy soils and cover crops and no-till and all that fun stuff. How many of you think that's working? Oh, good, I didn't say anything. It's not. USDA calls me and says, hey, it's not working. What do we do? So we need to stop doing some things. How many of you, and this is not, I'm not picking on you, how many of you still use chemical fertilizers in your production? Urea, anhydrous, things like, how many of you still use pesticides, herbicides to help control things? Okay. I'm done. Thank you very much for coming. So runoff is a big problem. You know, you guys are already doing all the right things, so I'll just jump to the fun stuff. This is what's happening to the Gulf. All that fertilizer they put on the ground in the Midwest gets into the Mississippi, causes eutrophication, and is what's caused the dead zones. The U.S. for years denied point source pollution from agriculture, right? And they spent how many billions of dollars trying to clean up factories, clean up our cars, when really that's less than 1% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. It's agriculture that's killing the world, not the cars. So let's stop focusing on what's not the problem, and let's start fixing the problem. How many of you would like to be a neutral carbon sink? How many of you would like to know that what you're doing is reversing climate change? You know, how many of you believe in climate change? Current administration set aside, all right? So climate change is happening. Anybody who works the earth or works with people who work with the earth know that, right? Things are different. How many of you have had the same spring in the last 10 years? It's different every year, right? Farmer's Almanac is a joke now. It doesn't work. So one of the things that he did mention was tools. So this is just my way of kind of introducing some stuff. So tools, I'm a big fan of tools. I love tools. Soil microbiology is a tool. Proper fertility is a tool. Where you grow, what you grow, those are all manifestations and different ways to do it. There are as many ways to grow a plant as there are people who grow them, right? There's no one answer to all of it. And there's no one expert. I am not an expert in everything. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a agronomist. Somebody asked me about planting seeds or how deep to plant a seed. I'm like, I don't know. What do I know about that? I mean, I know what the biology needs to look like for that plant, but I don't know how deep to put the seed in the ground. I'm not an agronomist. So utilize experts, and I think that's what Chris was getting at too, because this whole room is full of experts. Not only me as a speaker, but you guys as experienced growers, farmers, you all have expertise. Use it. Don't be afraid to use it. And share it, please. Because we all need to work together, like Chris was saying. So, how many of you have tested your soil microbiology before? This is a fun question. How many of you have your own microscope? How many of you find it useful? All right, great. So there's some really simple things you can do at home, and we kind of encourage it. But there's other things you can't do at home that we'll kind of talk about. So this is my tool. It's a microscope. So I'm going to get technical. This is a differential interference contrast epifluorescent compound microscope. Woohoo! It's a $20,000 machine. Okay. The optics, just the objective lenses on this microscope cost about $2,000 each, just for the little objective. And the technicians to operate it are even more expensive. So, but I have some great people, well trained. So this is what we use to measure the biology. Now, look, I like biology. My history, I'm actually a computer guy. I came into the lab in 2003 to work on the database system that generates the reports and said, wow, this is cool what they're doing, this soil microbiology. How many of you have heard of Soil Food Web? Dr. Ingham? All right, so she taught me. This is her lab. This is what she started in, back in the day at OSU. And I took over from her so she can go and do her thing, right? Rodale and all that. So I liked what I saw. Now, I'm not a farmer. I've done farming. I've done landscaping. I was a kid. I picked radishes and onions and lettuce alongside the wonderful labor force from South America and Mexico. Awesome, awesome people. And damn the wall, I'll be the first one with the sledgehammer. That stupid thing. Anyways, so I don't like farming, but I love farmers, and I respect, and I want to help. And this was a way for me to be able to help farmers without actually having to farm. Because it's a lot of hard work, right? I mean, you know, so sitting at a microscope, that seems easier, and I can reach a lot more farmers, right? So I've had the privilege of going around the world working with people, you know, 100,000 hectares of rapeseed in Ukraine, trying to go biological on 250,000 acres. Yikes. Oh, talk about a learning experience. How many of you like coffee? Right? Now, a few of you, okay. So, more you closet coffee drinkers, I think. So one of the farms that I worked with in Guatemala was a coffee plantation, and one of their biggest customers was Starbucks. But the plantation was dying. We helped them fix that. So if you get single source Guatemalan coffee at Starbucks, chances are pretty good it's from Santa Isabella there in Guatemala, because they're one of the big customers. So I've had the privilege of working with all kinds of different crops. I've been working with the cannabis industry since before it was cool. Right? We used to get these interesting packages in the mail full of money orders and a bag of dirt. And it says tomato. That's all and a phone number, right? That was it. No address. No. So you call them and say, well, where are you at? Because, sometimes location can be, well, somewhere between Eugene and San Francisco. Okay. So when it was less cool and more risky, I guess you could say, so people weren't so forthcoming. It's really nice now to be able to actually put cannabis on our reports, medical marijuana, and not have to worry about it. So it's good for everybody. So I'm going to talk about biology now, because that's what I'm supposed to talk about. I don't even know what time it is, so hopefully somebody's going to tell me when to stop. Oh, good. Bacteria. So this is really quick. Usually this is a 2-day workshop in like less than an hour, right? So bacteria. Bacteria is cool. I like bacteria. We all like bacteria because we can't get away from it, right? It's everywhere. It's all over us, everywhere. It's amazing stuff. Bacteria eats everything. There isn't a known naturally occurring substance in the world that isn't consumed by bacteria. Radiation, arsenic, heavy metals, all kinds of different salts, all of our nutrient content. And they break down the sand, silt, and clay of the soil. They break down the organic matter and store all those nutrients as protein right there in the soil. And it's the building block of the whole living soil thing is the bacteria. We're not even very good at killing it. So here's a little cluster of E. coli. Terrifying stuff, right? E. coli. Well, how many of you know there are species of bacteria, right? In a healthy tablespoon, when I started in 2003, they estimated 1 million species in a tablespoon of soil. 1 million species. Within 10 years, it was 7 million species estimate. And now I just read a report that because they keep changing the definition of species, it's now over 100 million estimated species of bacteria alone. There's more species of bacteria than all other species of all other life forms combined. Pretty cool. So I geek out on this stuff, right? Like you can probably tell. So, but the point is the bacteria collect the nutrients and they store it in the soil. And they're building soil structure. They're starting to the process of stabilizing the soil. Now, every soil has bacteria. Even the worst ag soil has bacteria. We can't get rid of it. We don't know how. How many millions of dollars do people spend trying to get rid of it? But we want diversity. We want a lot of it. Then there's fungi. Now, fungi, everybody loves fungi, right? They're fun, right? So mushrooms, most of us are familiar with, when we think of fungi, we think of mushrooms, right? How many of you like mushrooms? Right? How many of you don't like mushrooms? There's a few. My wife doesn't like mushrooms. It's just, that's cool, I don't like Brussels sprouts either, so, whatever. So fungi are very similar to bacteria. They're very simple organisms. They grow in these hyphal networks. So you get these strands of fungi, and they actually can bind up like clusters of bacteria, and they're really important for structure. So if you have clay problems, if you have structural issues with your soil, figure out how much fungi you got. Because if it's out of balance with the bacteria, it isn't going to work. The soil is broken at that point. It's all about balance. It's not about good guys or bad guys, although a lot of people talk about those in those terms. It's about a holistic balance. And everything we do, we test for these organisms. And we can tell you what that balance is So here, this is a cool one. So here's fungi, and I know this is hard to see, right? You guys, way over there, hard to see the pictures, but so that's a fungal strand covered in bacteria. Pretty healthy system. One of the things that we can do that's different in the lab than what a lot of people can do at home is we can add a special stain to the sample, and we can determine how much of that organism is metabolizing oxygen. So aerobic activity. And the way I look at it is, if you think of a roadside crew, right? So there's a lot of construction driving down from Corvallis, and there's crews standing on the side of the road, 10 guys standing there, and there's one guy with the shovel moving some gravel. Well, he's the active one, right? The rest of them are just there. Now, at any moment, they could change places, or another shovel could show up, and there could be two of them. But chances are the guy in the white shirt with the cell phone, he ain't picking up a shovel. That's not his job. So, but that's the activity. They're doing the heavy lifting. And so by knowing that and that balance, I can tell you whether or not you're going to have good production, because these things are what make the nutrients available to the soil. They adjust the pH. You know, how many of you struggle with pH in your soils? Nobody? Oh, so test your pH. It's important. You know, it's part of the system. It's part of the chemical processes in the soil. Bacteria and fungi can adjust your pH for you, and they can make it right, but they have to be in the right balance. So one of the other things, and this is cool, and this is important for a lot of plants, calcium. So this is fungi, and the little white circles on the fungi is calcium oxalate. Those calcium crystals are pulled out of the soil by the fungi, and they can help balance the calcium and magnesium in the soil and reduce your clay. And I know a lot of us deal with heavy clay issues. We don't like the clay. It's the fungi that will fix that. So, and again, these are really broad, simple statements that I'm making for this talk. There's the detail. My friend Tay is over here. We have lunch all the time. We go down the rabbit hole. So it's easy to go down the rabbit hole for days and days. So bacteria and fungi. Now, there's another group of organisms after that that we can test, and those are the protozoa. Now, the protozoa are consumers. They're predators. They eat the bacteria and the fungi, and when they do that, then they poop out fertilizer. They actually crap ammonia directly into the root system of your plants. And depending on the pH of the soil, the oxygen level of the soil, the moisture content, that will feed your plants. How many of you like nitrogen going to your plants, right? Well, it's pretty important. How many of you know what nitrite is? Nitrite? So there's a few of you. So how many of you have ever bought nitrite fertilizer? It's a trick question because they don't sell it. Because nitrite is a form of nitrogen that is favored by weeds. So you have a lot of weed pressure, poor soil conditions. That ammonia that's being released by the biology gets converted into a form that only weeds will utilize. Now, nitrate and ammonium is what your plants want. And which version does your plant want? Do you even know? Stages of growth? What form? How many of you think you need nitrate all the time? Or ammonium? Or even know the difference? Okay, so that's, come to my workshop. So I don't spend a lot of time on that. But basically, all of the nutrients are then, this is the natural nutrient cycle. If the bacteria and fungi are working correctly and there are adequate levels of protozoa, here's another protozoa, if they're functioning correctly and at adequate populations, they will feed your plants. You know, and these guys can release the equivalent of as much as 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre over a 3-month period. So, who fertilizes the forest? These guys do. Now, how many of you think you can achieve natural, perfect conditions in your soil? Okay, good. You're right. It's tough. You know, how many of you doing restoration projects? Okay, now in that situation, you could set it in motion and let it go. But as long as people are getting their hands into the dirt, you're going to have to do things to help supplement the biology because it needs to eat too, right? You can't just throw the biology into sand and expect it to feed your plants. You have to have the organic matter, you have to have the mineral content. So you're always fertilizing, but less, a lot less. All right, now these are fun. Oh. Yeah. Early successional plant. Yeah, plant that likes to colonize areas of disturbance. Not always, well, weeds will grow everywhere. It's whether or not the weed is a problem. Yeah, over time. Yeah. Ecological succession means that the plant community will change over time as the soil becomes more and more healthy. Organic matter increases, pH changes. So weeds come in and populate, and then you get annual grasses, perennial grasses, and eventually you could end up with old growth forest as like the climax community. So again, 2-day workshop for that kind of stuff. So, but yeah. So, and weeds never go away because I'll tell you what, a dandelion will grow wherever the heck it wants. I don't care how healthy the soil is, it'll grow, right? Some of the nettles, but the question becomes, how much of a problem are they? You know, how many of you would leave the weeds if you didn't think they were stealing nutrients from your plants? You know, I like weeds. I think they're awesome cover crop. Some of the most productive customers I have, their weed population is phenomenal. You know, it's an awesome cover crop underneath their blueberries. They just go and cut it. You know, doesn't interfere, doesn't take away from their production, because their blueberries, they're getting 3 times the average production of anybody else. So, you know, nematodes, dun dun dun. Nematodes bad, right? How many of you fight nematode problems? Have nematode problems? See, you guys, man, I need some corn growers or soybean guys or something, you know? So nematodes are another type of predator. Most of them are good, but there are a few that are root-feeding nematodes that attack the plants. This is a bacterial feeder. He loves to eat bacteria. There's fungal feeders. There's predatory nematodes. How many of you buy nematodes for control of different problems? You know, be careful with that. Any one thing at a time is not necessarily good, so be sure to balance it with other tools. You know, there are no silver bullets. They're just tools, right? So one of the problems with root-feeding nematodes, this guy, they plant the eggs in the plant, and when the eggs hatch, that's what causes the damage, so it's not direct. Anyways, this is kind of cool. Nematode eggs. How many of you knew nematodes had eggs, right? So for those of you who don't know, nematodes are microscopic worms, live in the soil, very prolific and everywhere. So this is a fun one. You guys have seen this picture, right? Just root feeders. That's really the only kind. There's a group called switchers, where they eat fungi, but if there's no fungi for them to eat, they are known to attack roots. But for the most part, there's just 5 main categories: bacteria, fungi, predatory, and then root-feeding nematodes. And then this. So now this guy, yeah, have you seen this picture? All right, okay, famous pictures. One of my favorite pictures ever. I'm going to have a bronze statue made of this because it's so cool. So this is a root-feeding nematode that has been attacked or attracted to a particular type of fungi. And this fungi simulates stressed plant. So it puts a chemical into the soil, and when plants aren't getting proper nutrient, you know, how many of you heard of root exudates, right? Root exudates, the plants collect sunlight energy and CO2 from the atmosphere. They create sugar, and they dump as much as 70% of that into the soil. and that is to attract the microorganisms to bring in what they need. You know, for different organisms to provide different services. When the plant doesn't get that nutrient that it's looking for, the biology doesn't respond, the plant gets stressed. And then it continues to put out more root exudates and things get all weird. The chemical signature in the soil starts telling Mother Nature, hey, come clean this thing up. It's not doing well. So all disease is that, right? Disease. I mean, you fight disease all the time, right? Powdery mildew, come on. You know, black spot, botrytis. I think that was a bad word, right? So all of those things are symptoms of an out of balance soil. And that it's putting stress on your plant, and those disease-causing organisms are attracted. Plus, they're opportunists. So no. Yeah. So all disease-causing organisms are naturally occurring in the soil. They're part of the holistic system. It's only when the conditions become out of balance that those diseases manifest as in a complex adaptive system to begin the process of converting that plant that shouldn't be growing there into organic matter, so that the next time that plant shows up, it might have a better chance of growing there. So all disease is a sign of imbalance, period. And I know the pathologists hate it when I say that, but, you know, fix the balance, fix the problems. You know, all of our agricultural problems are directly tied to we have bad soil. So if we fix the soil, we make living soil, we'll have a better shot. Anyways, back to this nematode and this fungi. Fungi puts out a chemical, simulates that stressed plant, traps the nematode, and then eats it. It's awesome. And this is a really common fungi. Lives everywhere, except in agricultural soils that are tilled. It's very sensitive to disturbance. So all of the root-feeding nematode problems in the Midwest are because they overtill. And so one of the advantages of going to a no-till system is that it does start providing the opportunity for these types of organisms to recover. But it's slow, very slow. All right, how am I doing? Great. Oh, I might even end early. Not likely. Oh. So, yeah, when I talk about tilling, I'm talking about chronic overtilling of pulverizing the soil. So if you're talking about keyline plowing, mold borer plowing, or even light tining, things like that, that's not a problem. I don't have a problem with people incorporating running a rototiller through the soil once early in the spring to get things going. I have corn growers, and that's the next picture actually is my corn growers. They till the soil at least 6 times during the season. All right, and it's not even just tilling, it's tilling, and then of course they tilled it too soon, so they get the big giant clumps, right? So then they got to go in and disc it, then they got to go in and rake it. After harvest, they disc it again, and they roll it out, level it, and then they seal it for over winter. And then they come back again in the spring, and you wonder why they have trouble growing corn. So this is a project I did in Suriname. I went and taught the government how to make compost because people wanted safe food. How many of you want safe food? Awesome, safe, yeah. All right, yeah, that's the way. So these guys, they don't have an organic program, but they have a group that is committed to no pesticides and no chemical fertilizers through a nonprofit. It's the first step. They have a booth at the market in Paramaribo. Every Wednesday morning, they show up, set up, and within an hour of the market opening, they close and go home because they sold out within an hour. How many of you do farmers markets, stuff like that, and would like to sell out in the first hour? Wouldn't that be cool? That'd be great. That's a wonderful Saturday. You know, most of the vendors buy from them. other farmers buy their produce because they know it's safe. They didn't use chemicals. So it's a really cool program, and I think, you know, a lot of people do appreciate that. So here's the corn in Ileton. And just real quick, this is the normal corn. Looks pretty exciting, huh? Nice and brown and dead. This is in the northern Delta region of California. This is the corn we did, just one season, one application of some biology into the soil. The difference in the corn is pretty phenomenal. And these guys, the normal guys, used pesticides for fireworm and silkworm, and they still had fireworm and silkworm. They fertilized. We didn't fertilize. We got the same yield. It looks like ours is better, but we have a lot more moisture than them. They're dried out in the field. We had to dry it out separate. But it was about $400 less an acre to do what we did. We couldn't find a fireworm to save our lives, and we didn't spray pesticides. You know, we did find a silkworm after about 20 minutes of searching. Every single ear of corn that we looked at in the conventional side had a silkworm, and they were teeny little things. Now this is silage corn. I told them to plant sweet corn, because if they had planted sweet corn, they would have made an extra $1,000 an acre on this stuff, but that's okay. So how many of you liked pumpkin? So this is giant pumpkin. This is Brant, Marysville, the Half Moon Bay. So he grew a giant pumpkin. I think this one's about 1,800 pounds. How many of you do giant vegetables, giant pumpkins? All right. So that is a crowd that you guys should totally engage with, okay? Because here's the thing. They're doing it for fun, and they are producing on 1,000 square feet almost over a ton of production. And how they do that, I think, would be valuable for you guys to start thinking about how to do it and learn about it. And it's the same, a lot of them are starting to get into the cannabis industry, so there's some crossover, you know. But these guys are intense, they're fun, they're very fun, but they're hobbyists, right? So they're not biological. He grew it just using biology and some good organic fertilizer. Really light touch. Fun stuff. Now, this is less fun to think about. This is another project. This is in India. You know, and there's problems in India, right? Farmer suicide rates through the roof because they can't grow anything, can't support their families. And it's pretty sad. And the reason that they are committing suicide is because the government pays their family when they kill themselves. So it's really terrible. Anyways, I'm not going there. Medical waste dump. So this is an ashram in India. My friend Peter, who I've worked with for years, he goes to this ashram and works with them. They used to just dump all the medical waste into the field and burn it and just left it for years. Heavy metals, all kinds of diseases, really nasty. So he decided that they should clean it up and maybe start composting some of that stuff, properly dispose of it. And he planted a food garden that he was planning on just leaving there for 5 years to clean up the soil, you know, pull the heavy metals out. He put a lot of hyperaccumulators, Phyto Remediation, a lot of compost teas, adding biology. Well, within 2 years, the plants were doing great. People started raiding the garden and eating the food out of here because it tasted better than anything else that they could find. And he freaked out, of course, right? He's like, oh my God, because the heavy metal levels were so high that it was totally unsafe. So he went and tested it. After only 2 years, 0 heavy metals in the food. He couldn't find anything. And the soil itself was down to safe levels. Yes, sir? Well, he used mangoes and a lot of cover crops, a lot of native plants, a lot of weeds. I think he had bananas and some other fruits that I don't even know. But some of the other things that you can do if you're careful, sunflowers are a hyperaccumulator. There's a whole bunch of other things. It's a whole different branch of science, the Phyto Remediation. So the bottom line for these guys, within 2 years, they took this contaminated waste dump and turned it into this lush garden. You know, and I use this as an example because I work with farmers like in Texas. How many of you been to Texas? You know, bring your passport, right? So these guys, they have what I call terminal uniqueness disease. How many of you are familiar with that? Terminal unique. You're unique, and nobody can tell you anything other than what you know, right? So terminal uniqueness disease. So I have to work around that. But I use this as an example and say, look, if a guy from San Diego with a little worm bin and some fruit seed can do this in India, do you think you can grow your melons in Texas a little better? So it's an example of an extreme. So some of the other projects that I do, so this is the project that I near and dear to me is in Haifa, Israel. So Mount Carmel in Haifa, this is the Baha'i Gardens. It's one of the jewel of Israel. When you fly into Tel Aviv, it's one of the first tourist advertisements that you see is for the gardens in Haifa. These guys are in a desert. Water costs more than gasoline for irrigation purposes, and they're growing annual and perennial grass from Oregon in a desert. They're growing ivy from England in a desert. The geraniums are from Spain. They do have some native plants. There's some citrus and olive and cedar. But they're doing it 100% organic and sustainable and biological. And this is a huge facility. This goes, it's like 19 different terraces. And believe me, it hurts to go up and down those stairs. And it's usually 80, 90 degrees, 80, 90% relative humidity, even though it's a desert system. So they collect all of the waste, they compost it, they turn it into tea and put it back into the thing. Now, that in and of itself is cool until you realize that this is a completely artificial system. It's one of the largest green roof projects in the world. Underneath these terraces is parking structures, office spaces. There's a road that runs underneath one of the terraces, and the theater down there and all kinds of cool stuff. It's a green roof, big one, big green roof. And so they're desert, expensive irrigation, plants that shouldn't be growing there. So, and they're doing it great, right? So if you ever get to Haifa, you should visit the garden. You can't miss it. I mean, it just cuts right up the side of the mountain. So how many of you like roses? You like growing roses? I mean, come on. Who doesn't like a rose? All right. Well, in Oregon, roses are a big deal, right? Portland is the city of roses. So right there in Corvallis, the city has an acre of roses. I don't even remember how many hundreds of plants growing in this acre. And the head landscape manager, came to us a few years ago and said, I don't want to spray fungicides anymore. They sprayed fungicides every other week to control powdery mildew, black spot. They sprayed pesticides a couple times during the year to control aphids. And they didn't want to do it anymore. It's a public place. Nobody pays attention to the signs. She'll be out there in her suit spraying the fungicide, and people come right up behind her and smell the roses. Right? It's like, so, and I don't recommend this, but she went cold turkey. She stopped spraying fungicides, replaced it with some biological products, and hasn't looked back. No noticeable disease pressure, black spot, powdery mildew, the aphids are gone. And the other benefit is when we started, it was July. Rose garden was in full bloom, an acre of roses, and you walk into the garden and you couldn't smell a rose. How many of you ever had that experience? walking into that many roses and just not be able to smell them. And no life. It was dead. There was no bees. There was no spiders. There was no anything in that garden. It was just lifeless. It's pretty, right? The blooms, but it was pretty lifeless. So after a month, we went back, and it was so dramatic. I wished I had smell-o-vision or something to communicate. I get out of my truck in the parking lot, and I can smell the roses. And then you walk into it, and it's just overwhelming. And we lost count after 5 minutes of the insects that we saw. We counted 20 or 30 insects within a few minutes: spiders, predatory beetles, wasps, bumblebees, yellow jackets. We found some aphids, but we also found ladybugs and lacewing. So the place had come back to life really quickly. So it can be done. You can grow really intensive things without worrying about disease. I'm not allowed to speak on that. You can come find me afterwards. Now, Earthfort, I created 2 products called Provide and Revive, and also I teach people how to make compost tea, composts. So there's a lot of tools, and there are so many products out there that are biological right now. There's kind of a glut almost of biological products, and most of them are pretty cool. But again, they're just tools, so whatever's right for you guys. Now, here's another extreme example, and I know I only have a few more minutes. How many of you have seen one of these before? Komodo Dragon. Okay, my favorite animal. Now, I'm not going to have a bronze made of this because he's like 8 foot long and 2.5 foot tall. So one of the most toxic animals in the world is the Komodo Dragon. You can't really see it. He's got a little drool coming off here. The bacteria that lives in that drool is flesh-eating bacteria. It bites its prey and walks away. 2 days later, it's dead from infection. If a dragon bites a human being and the doctor is standing there with the antibiotics, you'll only lose a portion of your arm or leg. If you can't get medical help within 24 hours, you'll lose your arm, and within 72 hours without medical attention, you're dead. Pretty crazy, right? Crazy animal. Why would they have this thing in a zoo? Well, but don't get bit, that's all. Interestingly enough, their poop is also really toxic. So E. coli levels in this habitat was 1 million colony-forming units of E. coli per gram of soil. How many of you know what the safe level of E. coli is in anything? 0. So we started out with a pretty intensive project, and this is actually a long story because it took a year just to get permission to do anything in this habitat because we had to get permission from the Indonesian government. So Woodland Park Zoo is a nonprofit conservation zoo. So everything that they do is to raise money for habitat, restoration, preservation, and conservation. So they borrow this animal from the Indonesian government to raise money to preserve these habitats. So here's the short story. I sprayed some stuff in this habitat and the E. coli went away. And the smell went away too. So I get to go to Woodland Park Zoo. They like me. I get a tour of the zoo with one of the zookeepers, and they get the $1 million tour because that's how much money we saved them over 10 years just in maintenance of this one habitat. Because they used to have to dig out 2 yards of soil every week in 5-gallon buckets in full hazmat gear. Yuck, right? So much labor. Now, half a yard every couple weeks, and they can walk through the habitat and scoop the poop all they want, and it's just easy enough for them to keep it clean. It's pretty cool. And since then, we've done other exhibits as well: ocelots, goats, monkeys. The ocelots were cool because we started treating their habitat and eliminated the smell of cat urine, right? 1,000 times more potent than normal cat urine. But like 6 weeks after we started that program, she had a litter of kittens. So now I get the $2 million tour because those kittens raised $1 million in one summer of extra visitors to the zoo. So, and plus the cattery didn't stink, so people didn't avoid it anymore. So you got more visitors that way. So I got one last little thing to end with. Radiation in Japan. How many of you remember Fukushima? Right? Okay. Fukushima is near and dear to me. I lived in Japan for a year. I've always been fascinated by the culture. And a friend contacted me in 2013, a couple years after Fukushima, and said, what can we do to help? So we did some experiments. Oregon State University actually has a live reactor. And so they were able to do live radiation experiments with our biology. And what we found was that we could immobilize the radiation in the environment. We prevented it from going into the groundwater, and we limited uptake into plants. We would be in Japan right now, which we're still working on. However, the news doesn't tell you this, but Fukushima is still active. The reactor is still spewing radiation. Reactors, well, they can't tell for sure because they're all melted together and they can't get to them. They haven't been able to shut it down yet. So anything they do today gets undone tomorrow. So anything we'd go and do, it'd just be a Band-Aid. And I'm not about Band-Aids, I'm about solutions. So we also did a field trial where we reduced the level of measurable radiation back to background levels in just one treatment with biology, our biology. So my biology is a consortium of lots of different things, lots of different bacteria and fungi. Yeah, I don't even know. I've got the list somewhere. I did genetic testing on it. There's a lot of organisms. The thing is there is no single organism that does any of this stuff. It's all about a holistic, interactive approach, and the organisms working together. So you can't just throw one organism at it and expect it to be successful. It won't work. They did some work with EM1 in Japan, which is just a handful of facultative anaerobes, and they got limited success with that. But yes. There is absolutely no research that I've seen that supports that, but I don't doubt it. So there's not enough research, right? So Oregon State University just got $7 million grant to study hemp and cannabis at the university, one of the first land grant universities. So hopefully they'll be doing some crazy stuff, looking at different things. But $7 million isn't a lot of money. Yeah. Okay. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So the mystery mixture, I like that. That's pretty cool. No, we do, what we put on the label is Trichoderma Bacillus Pseudomonas, just like everybody else. We got some mucor that we've been able to identify. There's Bavaria. I've got a list that did the DNA testing. I've got 300 genus of bacteria. So, and it's all naturally occurring. We do not currently culture any organisms. It's all naturally occurring, naturally sourced. And that is the secret, right? So I have some secrets, just a couple. So, yes, sir. Yeah. Well, so in the Palouse in Idaho, they're trying to adapt the cover crop no-till system in the Palouse to deal with acidifying soils. And it turns out that the problem that they're facing is most of the cover crop plants that they're recommending, which were based off of research done in Missouri, weren't growing. So that was one problem. They just wouldn't grow in that condition. And the no-till ended up, they had to put more fertilizer down to support the no-till because of trash. They actually use the nitrogen to burn the trash, and that is actually what's causing the soils to acidify, is the excess salt. It's bringing the aluminum out of the soil and it's causing it to acidify because of excess fertilizers. So it was a complete failure for a lot of the growers in that region. Other parts of the country, you know, it works fine. They're still trying to figure out how to do it in a more tropical. So in Florida and down along the Gulf, it's a little different as well. Well, in my opinion, a lot of them are failing because they're actually increasing their herbicide consumption in the process of adopting no-till cover crops. Yeah, conventional, yeah. No, the USDA doesn't do organic. All right, so, yes, sir. Well, yeah, so if you look at nature, that process is just happening. And if we can adopt that on a farm, then yeah, it's a lot of labor is done for us. The biology can actually till the soil and get the structure right, break down that organic matter so you don't have to till as much. Bring some of that nutrient out of the soil and make it available to the plant. We can fertilize less, right? But it has to be in the right balance for the plants that you're trying to grow. So yeah, it's a lot of free work, but it's also, you have to pay more attention. So that's the thing. All of this requires thinking. How many of you are allergic to thinking? Okay, if you're allergic to thinking, just throw your chemicals out. Just do what the guy with the white pickup truck tells you to do. If you're thinking, think about this stuff and start applying knowledge that is available. And just a quick little blurb. So I've got some brochures and cards on the back table, hopefully. And yeah, and these are the products that I have. So that's that. Thank you.